Welcome back on the AM show. So we get into our big stories, and this morning we're reviewing what the NCC has been telling us. They are conducting a survey, research, and what it's pointing to as of now is that the people of Ghana want the executive, the president, to have fewer powers. We'll be getting into Article 70 of the 1992 Constitution and what it says about the wide powers of government. But even before we do that, would also come here and find out what Article 5 of our Constitution says, and then lay the foundation for the conversation. Now, the 1992 Constitution, Article 5, stipulates, subject to the provisions of this article, the president may, by constitutional instrument, look at the powers, create a new region, like we have seen in recent times, alter the boundaries of a region, or C, provide for the merger of two or more regions. And we've seen that in the regional restructuring that has happened in recent times. That is Article 5. But there's more that we shall be looking at, talking about the powers of the executive, the powers of the president. So we'll be getting to that one shortly. In the interim, let me introduce the guests we have joining us this morning. Professor Ransford Jampo, political scientist at the University of Ghana. He'll be joining us shortly. We also have Fred Ejakon Odro, a local government analyst, and Guildfred Isiama, research fellow with the CDD. So I shall start with Guildfred Isiama. In fact, the guests who have joined the conversation, I just want to know your initial premise on this entire development. We've had research paper upon research paper talking about this all-important matter. The CDD is telling us basically that people feel, ordinary Ghanaians feel, the executive is too powerful, aka the president, and that too, there is also the component of the legislative body providing the ministers and deputy ministers, and that is also becoming a problem. What is your initial reaction to that, Guildfred Isiama? Do we have Guildfred? Maybe you could unmute for me, Guildfred.
Thank you. So the issue about the enormous powers that the Constitution gives to the President of Ghana has been a subject of discussion over the past decade. I think it was even before the 2010 constitutional review and continues to dominate national discussions. And anytime that the issue comes up, I think CDD Ghana also did a survey at the time that the constitutional, we were doing the, we wanted to revise the Constitution. Constitutional Review Commission was doing its work, and it became clear that majority of Ghanaians think that the president has too much powers in relation to what the president is supposed to do. Basically, the executive and the president are supposed to formulate and implement policies. So we need to be thinking about how much powers do they need to be able to carry out these functions, and the powers that they are given in the Constitution, including appointment of heads of independent commissions like Electoral Commission, like Auditor General. Are they really, really relevant to the functioning of the presidency? So I think that is one thing that I want to touch on.
Right.
Again, on the issue about members of parliament being part of the executive, it's also one issue that Ghanaians strongly oppose. It undermines the independence of parliament. It just gives enormous advantage of the executive over the president. One, you have majority of ministers being appointed from within parliament, which means that once the president, who also has the same powers to determine how many ministries is established, he can decide how many ministries he wants to be established, expand the numbers of ministers he wants to appoint, and the moment he does that, it means more people will be drawn from parliament. And even in addition to this, what is also most important to consider is the fact that you have most members of parliament who are serving as board members of state institutions. So basically, you can be assured that if you're a member of parliament and you are in good terms with the executive, especially the ruling party, you're a member of the ruling party, you are definitely going to be employed in the executive.
Interesting premise that you said, because that also brings into the picture the whole bit about meritocracy and people getting into these positions. But let's quickly wrap with this bit here, checking out some other details right before we continue, Guildford. So hold for me. Now, continuing on Article 31, the President, of course, we are talking about the executive here, may, acting in accordance with the advice of the Council of State, by proclamation published in the Gazette, declare that a state of emergency exists in Ghana or in any part of Ghana for the purpose of the provisions of this constitution, which you would find in other countries as well, a state of urgency or emergency. But notwithstanding any other provision of this article, where a proclamation is published under Clause 1 of this article, the President shall place immediately before Parliament the facts and circumstances leading to the declaration of the state of emergency. Again, when you go to Article 44, also crucial in this discussion, there shall be an electoral commission which shall consist of A, chairman, 2 deputy chairmen, that is B, and C, 4 other members. The members of the commission shall be appointed by the President under Article 70 of this Constitution. And this also brings to mind another thorny area, which many a time has become problematic, because then you have a president basically setting up the electoral commission. And this is something that many people have said shouldn't be the case, and that there should be some other body or bodies, maybe independent, coming through with this. We also take a look at Article 57. And there shall be a President of the Republic of Ghana, who shall be the head of state and head of government, and Commander-in-Chief of the Ghana Armed Forces. The President shall take precedence over all other persons in Ghana, and in descending order, the Vice President, the Speaker of Parliament, and the Chief Justice shall take precedence over all other persons in Ghana. So, of course, you see the President also fully in command in terms of the powers of the state, the armed forces in this regard. We also take a look, at a point we'll take a look at Article 70, but let's jump to Article 72. The President may, acting in consultation with the Council of State, A, grant to a person convicted of an offense a pardon, either free or subject to lawful conditions, the prerogative of mercy. B, granted to a person a respite, either indefinite or for a specified period, from the execution of punishment imposed on him for an offense. Or C, substitute a less severe form of punishment for a punishment imposed on a person for an offense. Or the Cabinet, this is 77, the Cabinet shall be summoned by the President, who shall preside at all its meetings, and in the absence of the President, the Vice President shall preside. The Cabinet shall regulate the procedure at its meetings. So when you look at all of this, they all point to the fact that we have a wide scope that the President, the executive, fits into, the roles they play, from appointments to selections to constituting this and that. That is the conversation we're having. And on the back of all of these, there are quite a number of matters to digest. So, Guildford, looking at all of these powers of the President and looking at what the NCCE says before I take my seat, is it a fair reflection when the NCCE says, per this research that it is conducting, most of the people it is interacting with are saying our executive is too powerful? Is it reflective?
Very reflective. And as I said earlier, this has come up over and over and over again.
Right.
I mean, I think you only touched on the initial bit, but if you look at even the appointment powers of the President, it's too wide. It's too wide. It's just too much. I mean, the President appoints almost every important person in this country. And as I said, the key issue that we must consider is, are these powers necessary for the core function of the executive, which is formulation and implementation of policies? Beside that, I think some of the powers that we have bestowed on the President actually undermines accountability and transparency in the functions of the executive. So it's about time we considered revising some of the powers that we have given to the president. I mean,
Right.
look, Public Services Commission, Lands Commission, SHRAJ, NCC, Auditor General. So why do we need the president to appoint the Auditor General?
Right.
How does the independent appointment processes of the Auditor General affect the function of the executive? And I think that is one key question that we must ask ourselves when we are interrogating the appointment powers of the president in this country. I think one key issue that has also come up is about the Article 71 holders and the fact that at the end of every 4 years, the president has to establish a committee to determine their salaries and emoluments. These are issues that Ghanaians have said that they think they are too much for the president. He needs to focus on his core functions and other things. We also need independent processes of selecting these people. Let me add briefly that there are some safeguards in the Constitution to limit the powers of the president. And so you will see that the Constitution will say the president should do this in consultation with the Council of State, or some of the appointments should pass through Parliament. But you and I are witnesses to the fact that these things have not worked the way we expected.
Let me bring in Fred Ejakun Odro, local government analyst. For you, looking at this discussion where we're talking about the wide, and as some would put it, the excessive powers of the executive, is it the right time, now that we have this latest report from the NCC, is it the right time to take a really critical look at these articles of our Constitution, which would also imply then that we really ought to be tweaking the 1992 Constitution of Ghana, at least in this regard?
I do think there's a need to have a discussion about this. Let me take us back to the work of the Constitutional Review Commission around 2011, 2012. And they made a lot of recommendations that we should have looked at, and we failed to do it. Even in recent memory, there's been an attempt by the sitting president in 2019 to review portions of the Constitution relative to local governance. And again, we couldn't go through with the process. My first instinct, yes, we need to review portions of the Constitution. But then we have to hasten slowly in all this debate, because this Constitution is the most enduring Constitution since our independence. And in as much as it may not be due to just because of the Constitution, we should not also delimit the fact that there has been certain provisions within this Constitution that has helped us hold on to this so-called fourth Republican system we are operating. So in view of that, I would say we have to have a thorough discussion about everything to do with the Constitution before we make wholesale changes. But I do admit to the challenges.
But you know, Mr. Odro, a quick one. So you talk about the fact that maybe we ought to take a close look at the entirety of the 1992 Constitution before we do this. The problem there is that we've seen what happened in 2010 when the Presidential Commission was set up to basically look at areas of the 1992 Constitution we could do away with. That document is gathering dust, a very thorough report by the Commission. So should we not then be looking at doing exactly what I suggested? Look at problematic areas which are relevant at any point in time and deal with them on a national level, go through the processes, rather than wait for a full-scale review of the 1992 Constitution, which one may not see the light of day anytime soon. And of course, there's also the element of time.
See, this whole discussion is being fueled also by ideological differences. If you go back to, I still want us to look at the review that was done in 2012.
Right.
It was a thorough work done. It's a very good work that was done. All the discussions we are holding today, most of them were part of that. Of course, there are certain aspects that I believe were watered down in the report. But by and large, my point is that there is a historical precedence to this constitution we have.
Right.
What led to the instabilities that we've experienced until this constitution? We can't hold a discussion without having all those issues in place. I am very much unhappy with the level to which the executive controls parliament, especially the majority side of parliament. However, I mean, there's a history to it. We can go back to 1980, there about 79, 80 under President Lehman, where we had a government having a minority, virtually a minority in parliament, and then the budget
and
of the government.
the budget under Lehman, right?
So these are things that can lead to instability in the system. So yes, I do agree. We need to have a review of the hold of the executive on the parliament, but then we must be cautious never to jeopardize the stability of the democracy we have. That is why I believe that.
Just to chip in again, I'll be interjecting like this from time to time so we can look at all the angles. So you're suggesting that if we adopt a piecemeal approach to dealing with the relevant aspects, because it is not every aspect of the Constitution we have to tweak. So the relevant aspects that over time, it's been 3 decades, just about 3 decades since the 1992 Constitution, which came into force somewhere in 1993. And you're saying that a piecemeal approach wouldn't work. It could create instability. Is that what you're saying?
No, not necessarily. I'm talking about certain key aspects of the Constitution. I mean, we are talking about the role of, the president, for instance, having a majority of his ministers from Parliament. This provision, we need to have a thorough discussion about this before we agree or disagree to review it. Because it was put there for a purpose. And this purpose, I believe, goes to the core of the stability we've had over the period. So in trying to tweak that, let me state, I believe in wholesale review. And we should do it once and for all, especially if you can build consensus. Because the challenge with reviewing this constitution is also partly to do with our inability to have a national consensus.
Right.
Some people have the view that this is our baby, we created it, there's no way we'll allow anybody to touch it. Some people have a view that this was based on an ideological stance, so we must change it at all costs. There's a school of thought that believe that the Constitution was created purposely for Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings,
right,
who was transitioning from a military rule to a civilian rule. So within the context of our history at that time, it was necessary to create a vehicle that will allow him to transit smoothly. Because he's no longer in power, and let me admit, he's gone to glory, it is time to review. Yes, that may be true. But my caution at every stage is we should not do anything to jeopardize the stability of the country. That is my first caution. I'm not saying I'm against any review. I'm all in support of quite a number of reviews. If you were to ask me, within the local governance sphere, there is a gamut of reforms we need to have, and the Constitution is restricting.
Like which ones? And I have an inkling what you could be, pointing to.
Yes,
but in the local, since we've gone there, let's just do that. So which one specifically?
The easier one you think of is the election of the MMDCs. That is part of it. But let me even give the election of presiding members. There's a constitutional provision which says that to even re-elect presiding members, you need 2/3 of the total membership of the assembly. For me, it is a ridiculous provision. That makes it so difficult to elect a presiding member who is so critical for the effective functioning of the assembly. These are just one of the things that I think we need to look at. So there are so many things that we have to sit down agree as a people. I mean, particularly, I'm so much interested in consensus building.
Right.
Because if you do anything without building consensus, it will fall flat in the face before we start.
How do we build this consensus?
Well, I mean,
what are your suggestions in arriving at that? Because I pose that question from the fact that we not only have a very polarized political system, not just talking about the political parties, but the adherents of the various political parties. So how exactly do we go about that?
Well, I think one of the things I start with is we've had this constitution since 1992. So we are talking about 30 years. Within the last 30 years, let us ask ourselves as a people, have we reaped the expected benefits we were hoping to get out of this constitution? If we are failing to do that, I think the best thing we have to do as a people is to sit back and say, look, this has not worked as we wanted. And we have an opportunity to come together as a people to fix this. Right. So let us put aside our differences. Let us also be, you see, consensus building comes with compromises. You may not get everything you want, but in the spirit of give and take, you accept certain things and you take certain things. If we don't start from that, and the way we position ourselves as groups, as individuals, as ideological blocks, these are the key things that affect our ability to build consensus.
Let me come to Guildford, and let me just walk you through some of what we have subscribed to as a country when it comes to the powers of the president. I walked you through some of those, and you're fully aware of them per our constitution. But when you look at Article 70, which is crucial to the conversation we're having, appointments by the president. One says the president shall, acting in consultation with the Council of State, appoint A, the Commissioner for Human Rights and Administrative Justice and his deputies. B, the Auditor General. C, the District Assembly's Common Fund Administrator. D, the Chairman and other members of the, and it follows, I, the Public Services Commission, II, the Lands Commission, III, the governing bodies of public corporations, IV, a National Council for Higher Education, howsoever described, and E, the holders of such other offices as may be prescribed by this Constitution or by any other law not inconsistent with this Constitution. 2, the President shall, acting on the advice of the Council of State, appoint the Chairman, Deputy Chairman, and like I mentioned earlier, other members of the Electoral Commission. Just look at the scope. We've not even spoken about state-owned enterprises and other bodies that, for which the CEOs and others would be appointed by the president. Just look at the scope, from our elections to our auditing structures as a state to the management of the common fund at the district assembly level to the chairmanship or leadership of all of these institutions. That is what the 1992 Constitution bequeathed to us. But some analysts would suggest that the 1992 Constitution, those who put it together, the framers, did not envisage that we would have a two-party system like we do now, where two parties, the NDC and the MPP, have a stranglehold on our democracy, so to speak. How then do we deal with this situation? Mr. Jacko Odro says, maybe we don't need a piecemeal approach. Are you in agreement with that?
Well, I think, yes, we need to review our constitution. There are certain recommendations by the Constitutional Review Commission which have been contested. So those ones are there. Maybe we need to have a critical look at those recommendations and also re-examine our constitution again. The powers, as we've stated over and over again, the executive doesn't need all those powers. The president doesn't need all those powers to be able to perform his function. Why should you be the one appointing the Electoral Commission? What's the interest of the president? Because the Electoral Commission transcends beyond one administration and their functions are clear for the sake of their independence and even perceived independence. Auditor General, institutions that are supposed to hold the executive accountable. Why do we put all these persons, under a form of control of the executive? So I think it's about time we took a critical look at the powers that we have given to presidents under the Fourth Republic. And it may be true, as you have stated, that they never anticipated that we're going to be locked in this two-party regime where you have a ruling party and an opposition party. So that may have informed why maybe they gave certain powers, thinking that if we're having more political parties and even coalitions in forming government, then the powers will be shared. We have been governing our state-owned enterprises in a way that incur cost. If you look at the report, we spend billions of cedis every year feeding into some of these state-owned enterprises, and at the end of the day, they run at a loss. And it's been happening over and over and over again, all because we have given all the powers to the executive, who are interested in their regime survival, so they easily appoint party loyalists to occupy these positions, some of who wouldn't be employed if the state-owned enterprise were being managed by private persons because they don't have the expertise. Look at the constitution or the way we constitute our boards and the things that they do. If you look at the Auditor General's report, you really question whether these boards are really performing their functions and what significant role that they are playing in the managing of these agencies and these enterprises. So, I think we probably will be stretching the argument, but the point is that it is about time the president himself should realize that these functions, these powers that we have given to him, he may not be able to, supervise the people that he appoints. Look at local governments, and including 30% of elected members of the assembly to be appointed by the president. Does the president have time to do that? And these people, their functions are related to the people at the ground. So why do you give all these powers to the president? How does he even supervise? And
but when it
interests you,
right? Just go ahead with that point. I have a follow-up question, but just go ahead.
If it may interest you, these appointments are not done by the president. They are done by the political party executives at the local level, and they do what pleases them. Even though we even have strict guidelines as to people to be appointed to be part of the assembly, don't follow it.
So my quick interjection had to do with this. You say the president should realize it, but we've had presidents in this Fourth Republic, all of them, and it is not that they've not realized it, but none of them has been willing to shed the powers of the executive. They have all clung to it, so they're appointing the IGP and practically everybody. And we can see clearly, even as this latest report evinces, that it's not working. So the realization and acting on it are two very different things. What do you think to be the way forward?
Well, unfortunately, we may have to go the legal way, as stated. In some jurisdictions in the US, it's not everything that is written, in the laws of the country. Some are developed through conventions, but unfortunately, we don't have that side of history where conventionally we adopt and practice good governance and system that enhance accountability in our political sphere. So it is unfortunate that everything has to be marked by law. You wish that at a point people will realize that some of the functions and responsibilities that they are given are just too much for them to exercise or too much for them to even play effective supervisory role over the people that they appoint. So I think we just have to go by way of law instead of going by convention.
And so the law, but there are processes to be triggered. But let me come to Fred on this beat. So we also know that this has created a system where meritocracy has suffered. And when you have to fill so many positions, and of course, when there are your party members breathing down your neck, something must be done. For you, how has this impacted the winner takes all conversation?
It is terrible. Let us look at when there's changing government, especially from one party to the other. People seize toilets. Public toilets.
Right.
We've had people going to lock up government offices. I mean, NADMO offices. So many of these things are happening because people have the sense of entitlement. You see, for some of us, we believe that this whole challenge with going into election and then we will have all these peace messages around us because people feel we're going into election, it's virtually an issue of do or die. I mean, if your party does not win, you don't have any opportunity of being in government or being a part of the system. So it is very important that we go ahead attempting to, dismantle this issue of winner takes all mentality. But let me correct one point that you made earlier, that no president has made any attempt to change some of these things. I mean, let's go back to President Mills. He believed so much in the review of the Constitution that he set up a commission, which has given us a report that, in as much as, if you ask me personally, there may be aspects I would say, oh, I wish this were like that or like or the other. But by and large, it is a very good report we can work with. Then, even in recent times, President Kufuor attempted a review of the Constitution to enable us elect our own chief executives. But his view was that it should be done on partisan lines.
Exactly the point. Exactly the point.
This was the bone of contention. However, if we had succeeded in doing that, we could have had a lot more participation from all the political groupings in the country in the governance process. Because if at the local level, you have a different political party managing different districts, that would have been an inclusive system that we were going to practice. But we couldn't carry this through because of lack of consensus again. So right. I think that there's a will along the line. However, we ourselves have not agreed on what we want. We may talk about...
When you say we ourselves, what exactly do you mean? And maybe just a bit of an addition to the point you made. I did not say that nothing had been done in terms of reviewing the Constitution generally. In fact, I had cited the 2010 Constitutional Review Commission. What I made mention of was the fact that when it comes specifically to what some people feel to be the overbearing powers of the executive, the president, none of them has made a commitment or showed any real faith, good faith, in terms of shedding those powers, not a general review of the Constitution.
Okay. Well, I do accept that point, indeed. But my key issue here is, if we ourselves don't know what we want as a people, there is no way we can get anything done. I mean, there's so many things we need to look at. One, even the tenure of officers who are appointed. For how long should they be in power?
Right.
I mean, if we've had a case that you can appoint a 40-year-old to be the chairperson of the Electoral Commission, and that person is going to be there for how many electoral rounds? So this could be a strategic move by any president who has the power to appoint an Electoral Commission chairperson.
Right.
I mean, look at the capping, the judges. How many judges, Supreme Court judges do we need in this country? These are all part of the issues we must discuss and agree as a people that we are going to change these things. Otherwise, we keep on talking about the need for the reforms. We will never come to specific point that you say, this is the way we are.
Right. Quick one. So that is exactly where we find ourselves now. I mean, like I said, there have been research papers without number touching on this specific subject. I am looking at one, for example, from Professor Ransford Jampo of the Political Science Department. These things have been done even before the year 2000. After the year 2000, a lot of these research papers came to the fore as well, as early as 2006, 7, 2010, 2013. There have been a plethora of them. But when you speak about the people and getting involved so that we can bring about change, that's exactly where we find ourselves now with this latest NCCE release. We don't have the full scope of it because the research is not completely done. But according to the acting head of the NCC, Kathleen Addy, and what she tells us, it means that a lot of people in Ghana are saying our executive is too powerful, and that is in a way hobbling the work of, the state. We've come to that point, haven't we not? The people are saying, let's change this. So what else is needed?
Well, I will come back to my earliest point. Let's hasten slowly. We must, yes, I do agree. I am not happy with the level of patronage in the system. I am not happy with the enormous powers given to the president. I mean, let's be specific, president, because even as we do agree that some of the appointments are not directly made by him, they are made on his powers. So the buck stops with him. So the presidency is enclosed with too much powers in the system. And indeed, as you stated, it affects the level of accountability we need in our democracy. And there's so much waste because of some of these things. However, we must be careful not to touch things in piecemeal, which in the end can affect our stability. For me, the most important thing this constitution has done for us, among others, is to give us the state of stability that we have had to enable us even to hold this engagement we are having today. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the opportunity to hold this engagement. So whatever we want to do, the challenges we've identified, they are all important for us to look at them. But whatever prescription we want to make, we must be careful not to touch our stability. Otherwise, it will not augur well for us in our democracy. So I am all for the review. I'm all for the changes that must be made to the constitution. But we must be careful not to do anything that will affect our stability. That is my key point in all in all these.
And Guilford, I might as well add to that when it comes to the powers, they are so wide. A few more to add when you look at Article 70. You would find in there as well the government statistician, apart from the audit service, and a list of others, the governor of the Bank of Ghana. It is so wide that it sometimes beats imagination because it appears anywhere and everywhere. The president has a presence. And that also means that when it comes to the separation of powers and the influence of the executive, it is very difficult to clip the wings of an executive or a president who decides to, really hold the system by the scruff of the neck. But let's look at this other angle. The president also appoints representatives of the country abroad, aka, high commissioners to some countries or ambassadors as well. When you look at that area, is that something else we should be looking at in terms of maybe taking away those powers? What is your take on that?
Well, I think we, in our survey way back in 2010, most Ghanaians indicated that that power could still be retained by the president, but with the approval of supermajority of parliament. So you have maybe 2/3 of members of parliament approving who has that mandate to represent the country outside. So the president can still have those powers, but it must pass through strict process of vetting in parliament to ensure that we get the best people to represent us out there.
There is also the other matter when it comes to appointing ministers and deputy ministers. And this too, in the latest interaction with the NCC or the NCC with the people of Ghana, has also raised a very crucial matter. Because we see how, per the Constitution, about 40% of the ministers and their deputies must come from the House of Parliament. What that means is those in Parliament who should be focusing on the legislative work of the House now have a divided attention because a lot of them from the majority side will be ministers or deputies. which means that the focus they would have working in Parliament would be divided. That too has come to the fore. Guildford, your take on that and what remedial measures you feel we could bring to bear.
Well, that practice is very unhelpful to the health of our democracy, because we've spoken about the fact that checks and balances are very, very, very important. If we want to see or we want to get good results from these democratic experiments that we are doing,
right,
then we must sacrifice and go the hard way by not giving the executive the leeway to have excessive control of Parliament. As you stated, speakers upon speakers have complained about the fact that they don't get numbers from the ruling administration. So it undermines the work of Parliament in terms of the oversight that they play one, even in terms of their lawmaking functions. If you don't have the people there who work in committees to consider these issues, how are you going to get the work done? So that is one of the issues. And again, as I said earlier, in terms of oversight, if you have majority of ministers being appointed from within Parliament, and you don't place a ceiling on the number of ministers or ministries that the president can create, you can have a very crazy president who wants to establish 100 ministries and appoint ministers. What if this person decides, and he is supposed to get majority of his ministers from within Parliament? What is going to be made of Parliament? And currently, as you know, it is hard to have an executive who is willing to appoint members from the opposition. It hardly will happen. Again, what if we have the opposition party gaining more numbers in Parliament or gaining more strength in Parliament, and you have few members of the ruling party, from Parliament, and you are going to appoint majority from within Parliament? So the numbers game here, as we have it, I think it was decided on the incident in 1979, but I think the 1979 incident was misconstrued. It was basically Parliament doing its work. Parliament does its work by playing oversight over the executive. So if Parliament decides that the budget that the executive had presented was not right and that the executive had to withdraw the budget and bring in a new budget, I beg to differ that it's a recipe for instability. No, I don't think so. Parliament must hold the executive accountable under any circumstance. And what they need to do to hold the executive accountable, we must give them that leverage by stopping these majority of members of Parliament from being appointed, from within Parliament. In other jurisdictions like Nigeria, where they think that when you separate Parliament from the judiciary, it may also cause, some difficulties. In the past, they made provisions for a past senator to mediate between the executive and Parliament, so that if there are issues that are hard to, to consider, he can mediate some of these. But apart from that, we need separation of powers to ensure that the executive plays oversight responsibility.
Fred,
the legislature, plays oversight responsibility over the executive.
Right. For you, Fred, so I just did some calculation here. If you were to use all 275 members of Parliament, you would be getting about 110 of them if you're looking at the 40% quota. But it's also been agreed that, at least per the script in the Fourth Republic, presidents have been very reluctant to elect ministers or deputy ministers from the opposition. We've seen it a few times, depending on the political nature, when some parties, we saw Papa Kwesi Ndum, for example, at a point being a minister, but those have been rare instances, flashes in the pan. But when you look at the number that we have now, if you take 137, it would mean that some 54.8, which would then mean about 55 of them would come from Parliament. What for you is the real impact of this? And is that another matter that we ought to wait till we address the entire problem of our 1992 Constitution before we deal with?
No. The system does not impose any number on the president. it only says that the president should appoint a majority of his ministers from parliament. So even if the president chooses, I mean, the minimum number, if you look at the cabinet number of this country is 19. So at least the expectation in the constitution for if the president wants to appoint any number of ministers, the minimum he can appoint is 19. So if he were to go straightly by this and to appoint 19 ministers, no deputies, nothing else, the only point is that 10 of these people at least should be members of parliament. That is what the system says. I mean, there's full 40% rule. It says a majority of the ministers must be from parliament. But I want to chip in at this point. I mean, it is not as if that if you have members of parliament being ministers, it should necessarily create problems with separation of powers. If you go to the British system, there's fusion of powers in there. Members of parliament are also, I mean, in fact, a great majority of the ministers are members of parliament. Even within that system, there's still separation of powers at play. Parliament exercises its own, it exercises a lot of oversight over the work of the executive, even under this fusion fusion system. I mean, they practice parliamentary system of governance. So it is a question of our failure to understand the system we adapted for ourselves. And we've gone ahead to give so much powers to the presidency. So by itself, if you have this kind of fusion as pertains in the British system, which we are trying to copy to a large extent, I don't think it is totally bad, but it is our failure to practice what we have adapted effectively. That is what is causing us. So yes, if we want strict separation, I have no qualms about that. But I just want to put out there that you can have this fusion and still get Parliament to exercise the level of control or oversight it has to over the executive.
Do you feel, in looking at this arrangement, that maybe we should have clauses that permit or stipulate that in any administration there should be a quota as well for the opposition in terms of ministerial positions? Would that be a form of a solution?
I will be careful to go ahead to, put this in law. The current system doesn't prevent any president from doing that. But it may not be fair to do an analysis of past events.
Right.
All the past people who've been appointed. President Kufuor appointed a couple of people. President Mills also appointed people outside his party. Let us go, if we want to pick each one.
So just because you mentioned, when you look at Kufuor, for example, outside of the MPP, there was Malam Issa of the PNC. He was made Minister for Youth and Sports. There was, like I mentioned, Papa Kwesi Nzum.
How did it end?
Yeah, we could talk about how it ended in an ignominious manner, but at least the appointment was made.
Even Papa Kwesi Nzum.
Right.
How did it end? I mean, if you talk to some MPP members, they will tell you that at the point Papa Kwesi Nzum was claiming every good thing that the Kufuor administration did. And do you think it's also fair? Malam Issa, how did Malam Issa end?
Rather
Would that have
abruptly.
happened to him if he had been an MPP member? So these are some of the challenges. Even in recent times, Minister Azong, under President Mills.
Right.
How did it end? He was the last PNC man standing. He lost his seat. And to who? To an NDC member. So these are some of the challenges that you will grapple with. But of course, I believe in consensus building. So we must at all times build consensus. We must have situations that we can come together as a country. Because at the end of the day, this is our country. This is the only Ghana we have. If we don't do things that will help ourselves, nobody will come from outside to help us do anything. So if we can work out within the system, the current system for me does not exclude the president from appointing people outside his party.
Right.
Only they've done it, but for me, I don't think in all the cases, the end has not been really great for me to say that we can go on that path going forward.
So some have also suggested that let the president keep on making the appointments, no wahala, but let the recommendations come from independent bodies or other bodies. What is your take on that? In other words, let the president still, go ahead in terms of appointing from a list or a pool of people, but he will not be in charge of constituting the pool of people. That would also be some sort of remedy, wouldn't it?
That is something we can fashion if we really want to do that. But more importantly, in all the cases, I want us to begin to put a cap on these appointments. How many people should be appointed as ministers? How many people should be appointed as Supreme Court judges? That capping system should be part of the conversation.
So you're saying that as far as the justices of the court are concerned, for example, we should have a cap.
We should have a cap. I mean, Ghana, we are not that big a country. I believe from 7 to 9 Supreme Court judges should be enough for us. Maybe we may need a lot more judges at the lower level to spread it throughout the country. I mean, justice delivery should also be decentralized. I mean, it should be as close to the people as possible. That is what we need. And then for term limits, for me, that is also important. The capping of the numbers and term limits. If we are appointing an auditor general, why don't we ask the person to be in power for 4 years, as we've done for the Office of the Special Prosecutor? That 7 years for me was even long. But term limitations should be put on key appointments so that...
Like which ones? So you've mentioned the Office of the Special Prosecutor. Which other ones come to mind? Should the Electoral Commissioner, for example, be on a time leash?
There must be a time limitation. That you should be there for maybe 1 electoral cycle, at best 2 electoral cycles. But I don't see anything wrong with being there for 1 electoral cycle.
What do you think that would mean? Let's just stay on that bit, the Electoral Commission. What do you think that would mean for continuity? I remember Afarijan, for example, talking about continuity and the importance of this and that. What do you think? If the person serves for just 1 term, it could still be politically manipulated.
No. I mean, if the president is not appointing the person, president is not appointing the person, but we have a system in place that will take appointees through rigorous processes, and that you cannot bring in your favorites to take up those positions, then that person also knows they are only there for specified period, after which they will not be there. This issue of, for instance, if you have a president who is mischievous and starts appointing 40-year-olds as chairpersons for SHRAG, chairperson for this, and they'll be there. And all these people have got enormous powers, that discretionary one for that matter too. Right. And they are there and serving the interest of that political party that brought them into office. That is also an angle we should be looking at. They are all not helping our governance system.
Okay. I'll be taking your concluding comments in maybe just about some 2 minutes. But Guilfred, I just want you to address this final bit, and then you could add your concluding comments to it. There's also the bit about the CEOs of different state-owned enterprises and the boards to which many people are put by His Excellency, the President. We also see a certain rotation. They move along with the political terms. And so when a new party is in place, you know that all of you are going to be leaving within, 3 to 6 months, and a new crop of people will be there. In that instance, do you feel maybe we could have a system that allows those who are efficient, effective at post to remain regardless of which party is in power? And then you can add your concluding thoughts.
Well, I strongly believe that if you look at the reports on these state-owned enterprises, it points to any president, to any Ghanaian, that the way we've been doing things in terms of appointing people to these enterprises have not worked.
Right.
I mean, the cost we incur is just too much. And so a different modality for appointing people to serve on these
It shows even in the performance of the SOEs, doesn't it? Because we
Exactly.
simply put people there based on political affiliation.
Exactly. And unfortunately, some of them are not even accountable in terms of reports and other things that they are supposed to submit to Parliament on specific times. So I think there's a clear signal that we need to depart from what we've been doing because it hasn't helped us in any way. And then maybe having a more meritocratic system of appointing people to these state-owned enterprises may be more appropriate for us. I don't really have any time asked these people should there for 4 or 3 or 5 years, but I think the processes for appointing them should be meritocratic. It should be based on a merit system and pass through the Public Services Commission, appointing very qualified people to serve. I mean, you can even have advertise these positions and select the best through the Public Services Commission so that the president can take it up. In doing all these things, let me just divert a bit. We need to understand the incentives why your president or politicians want to have a hold over these state-owned enterprises. They appoint their people there, they feel party foot soldiers and party loyalists there because that is where they get their resources.
Right.
So unless we change the incentive structures, we may not be successful in this endeavor or trying to just change the way things work in these state-owned enterprises.
All right.
So on a whole, I think we've come, of age to do new things to ensure that our democracy does not fail right before us. We've been failing over the years because things haven't improved. Things continue to get worse, either perception of corruption or trust in state institutions. All these things are getting worse because of the way we do our things. And principally because you have given the executive too much powers that make them almost unaccountable.
Right.
They appoint other people to be who are supposed to, hold them accountable. They appoint other important people who are supposed to, ensure trustworthiness
Right.
in the way government functions.
Right.
And it's about time we began to revisit these things. Constitutional reform is necessary and we need it, and we must do it to ensure that we safeguard our democracy.
All right. Guilfred, we're immensely grateful for your time. But just to cap it all off, let me give the same opportunity to Fred Ejakun Odru as well. Interestingly, as you deliver your summary thoughts in just about a minute, if you can do that, a thought that just came to mind. Especially as you've been talking about term limits for the OSP and all of that, in other jurisdictions, even in neighboring countries, presidents themselves have maybe 5-year terms, 6-year terms, like we'll see in France as well. Do you think it would work if we had a single-term presidency so that you come for 5 or 6 years and you can't run again? Just feed that into your final thoughts. Or should we have, like some have said, 2 years maximum for a single term?
I think it is worth considering a long single term of 6 years or so, 7 years. I mean, whatever the number that we may all agree, because we spend too much time on, campaigning. We don't have a specified electoral system, electoral cycle in this country. So at the end of the last election is the beginning of the next election. So if we were having a single-term presidency, a long single-term presidency, I think it is worth considering, and I'll be very happy to be part of such a discussion.
How many years? How many years would you propose? In the Ivory Coast,
I would go between 6 to 7 years.
6 to 7 years.
I think that might be worth considering. But let me conclude by stating that I believe we need to have a holistic look at our constitution. There are a number of areas we may have to change or review, whichever word is appropriate. But I would pray that we can first and foremost build consensus on this process and the key things we are going to do, I would hope we can, in a spirit of compromise, agree on what is best for our country. We may not get everything perfect at the first instance,
Right.
but the Constitution should be a living document that is subject to change periodically. But if we are going to go into a major review too, I'll always pray that we hasten slowly in arriving at any conclusion, because this is the most enduring constitution we've ever had in this country.
True.
And whatever we want to do with it, we must be very careful, and we must do it in the spirit of nationalism, that we're going to do best for the country, not what is best for any group of people or any individual.
It's been insightful, this engagement. Fred Ejakun Odro, local government analyst, joining the conversation. Thank you so much, sir. We also had Godfred Esiama, research fellow with the CDD. But stay with us. Right after the break, we're getting into all the talk about monkeypox. 5 cases detected, and one of them, a Ghanaian who traveled to the United States, a returnee. Now we have the Eastern, Western, and Greater Accra regions. What are the ins and outs? What should we know about monkeypox and how to safeguard ourselves? That discussion up next on the AM show. Do stay.